The meeting is being webcast, and if we can now go into the emergency evacuation procedure. It's very apt after our last discussions of happenings in Bristol at the moment.
When the continuous alarm bell sounds, you must evacuate the building by one of the designated exits and proceed to the main assembly point. The designated exits are signposted. Arrangements are in place for the safe evacuation of disabled people.
Thank you very much. Any apologies for absence on substitutions? Which is great. We've got a full house here today. Thank you. And any declarations of interest? And if anything crops up during the discussion and any councillor feels that they need to declare, then please do at that point in time. We have got no urgent business that has been put forward. We do have one councillor statement, and that is Councillor Karen Walker has made a statement. I don't know if she's here to read out our annual Christmas list.
It has been circulated.
But it has been circulated for everybody. As always, the Peasdown councillors do make an early foray into the budget discussions with a list of what Peasdown needs. So that statement will be passed on to the relevant cabinet members. The minutes of the last scrutiny panel, can we agree that those are correct record and I can sign those? Yes, I'm seeing yes. For that. Thank you very much. And then next agenda item is the cabinet member update, but I understand we're going to roll this through into the following agenda items, as it would otherwise be an artificial division, particularly when we come to agenda item 10, economic strategy and the medium-term financial strategy. But agenda item 9 is the council tax support scheme and a consultation update. And thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Damien's here to give a verbal update, but just to frame this. So the consultation, apologies you haven't got a written update, but the consultation only finished at the beginning of this week. So we're just looking at the initial, the results of that consultation. I think if I was going to highlight a few things, it's that the response from Citizens Advice was very positive, and they are obviously an organisation who know an awful lot about the support that the council provides and the effects that change in council support would have. So their understanding of the impact on the poorest households is obviously very good, and they were very much in favour. Overall, the response has been pretty positive. There are obviously negative responses from those households which are going to be negatively affected. But there have also been responses from a majority of responses that are positive. I think I'd also note that there's a significant minority who actually hadn't understood what the proposals were, so we do need to make sure that the comms are completely clear about what the proposals are, because I think there's been a certain amount of misunderstanding as well. But other than that, I'm going to hand over to Damien for a verbal update.
Hello, everybody. So there were 3 strands to the consultation exercise. The first question focused on whether the council should be disregarding the housing cost element in universal credit, and 57% of respondents said that we should, 14% said they weren't sure, and 29% said no, we shouldn't disregard the housing cost element. There are 199 responses in total, which is a fairly surprising number. Some of the themes which came out from people who said we should disregard the housing cost elements were that there's a cost of living crisis and this would help residents, that it would help residents with their mental health, and overwhelmingly because the housing cost element is intended for rent and it's not income. Those who said no to this question, I think primarily the comments were focused about how it would adversely affect them as an individual, rather than the concept of whether the housing cost element should be disregarded in full. There were 7 respondents said that it was unfair to make other people pay for this particular change. But on the whole, I think some of the responses were quite moving in that people couldn't understand why we were doing this or how they would manage with these particular changes. So as Mark said, I think further comms will be necessary, particularly for the people who are going to be adversely affected. And if this does go ahead, then we probably plan to issue something in the new year or February time to signpost people towards better mental health support, which is available in the area, and also practical financial support available from the welfare support team to help them manage the initial shock of having to pay, in some cases, quite a bit more council tax. So the second strand to the consultation focused on the childcare element of universal credit and whether that should be disregarded. So this would impact a much smaller cohort of residents. The response for that was that 46% said yes, we should disregard it, 36% weren't sure, and 18% said no, we shouldn't disregard it. So of those who said we should disregard the childcare element, most of the responses were focused around the fact that it is an income. It's intended to reimburse the claimant for costs already incurred and paid for in most cases to childcare providers. There's a significant number of 36% said they weren't sure, and looking at some of the responses, there seemed to be some confusion about the childcare element of universal credit and the child element, which is intended to pay for the upkeep of children rather than nursery or childcare fees. So again, I think that should this go ahead, further comments will be needed to explain exactly why we're doing this and what the reasons behind that, exactly which elements are going to be disregarded, and the support that's going to be available for people who are adversely affected. So the final strand was focused on whether the proposed changes would be good or bad for individual respondents. 52% said that they would benefit from these changes, 11% weren't sure, and 37% said that the changes would be bad for them. Again, some of the responses mainly focused around how individual households would cope with the changes rather than whether they were sort of looking at the questions impartially about whether the council should do this or not. But overall, I think it was a successful consultation, and I've prepared a more detailed analysis which would be included as part of the as a background paper to the report when it's put to council.
Thank you. Any questions or comments on detail?
Just to comment that I think you've done very well to get engagement from a hard-to-engage group, and I think it's good that people have been able to voice their criticisms and concerns, but I hope that they won't put us off doing the right thing as in terms of the policy.
Yeah, I think it will at the end of the day be for council to make the decision, and the people who responded, they would have received a letter from the service setting out how much they currently qualify for and how much they stand to gain or to lose. And so the responses are going to be quite black and white. I think I've outlined in the analysis that a majority of them will be biased one way or the other. That's unavoidable, but I think it's very important that the council is very transparent about this.
Okay, thank you. I raised this at the last meeting. It really is imperative that we put the message across and we give the signposts very clearly to those people who are going to be disadvantaged. That's really all I need to say on that point. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just conscious that people listening to this that might not have been here for the previous meeting, it might be worth emphasising the numbers that are seen to benefit from this compared to those that might lose out. It's almost double we're expecting to benefit from this change, whereas the narrative we might hear back from this report doesn't quite emphasise that. It is interesting, actually, that the majority of the respondents, 50%, were people that were going to benefit, and actually only 11% were those that were losing out. Usually it's the other way around with the consultation, isn't it? But could you just remind us again that the numbers that are likely to benefit?
So there's around about, there should be, we estimate around about 2,700 households who will benefit from these changes, and around about 1,000 who will lose out, and about 190 who would see no change to their entitlement. And it was quite interesting that some of the respondents around about 7 respondents who said that we should disregard the housing cost element were households who would lose out. So it was quite reassuring to see that the information that we had provided, it seemed to have been understood by a group of residents who saw beyond how it would impact them and were quite impartial. It was refreshing for me to see that.
Yeah, just if I can just add to that as well, just to emphasise the fact that thank you, Councillor Hodge, for pointing out that not everybody will be completely up to speed with what we're proposing here, but that this is not a cost-saving exercise, and that this is not aimed at saving money. In fact, it might cost us a little more. It is aimed at improving the equity of the scheme, not saving money.
Yeah, and I think that we do need to be clear in the comms about that. Should it be agreed at full council? Because there were a couple of respondents who did jump to that conclusion that Baines are trying to save money, and that's the real reason. Whereas in fact, it's forecast to cost around about £225,000 more than the scheme currently does, just because of these changes.
Yeah, and particularly given the conversation we're going to come on to about budgets and the pressure on budgets, this just goes to emphasise that we are absolutely aiming to protect the most vulnerable. This is not a cost-saving exercise. It's going to cost us a bit more in order to better protect the most vulnerable.
Thank you for that. And I think to follow up on Ian's point, that there are 1,000 households who will be losing out. Please can we detail what support we are giving to them, or what signposting we are giving to them in some detail? And I'd suggest that should be a part of the report, the substantive report.
Yeah, that'll be included. Yeah.
And can I ask, is there any details of what CAB actually said?
Yeah, I'll just get the response up. I'll read out the summary. Sian Francis from CAB has responded on behalf of the organisation. In summary, they believe that the proposed changes will be fairer between different households, so that would be owner-occupiers and renters. Fairer for individual households. It will make it easier to support people to pay their council tax because it's simpler, and it will help residents of Baines have more faith in their council. That's the response.
Just for the record, if we're quoting CA, I'm a CA volunteer.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. Look forward to seeing the substantive report. Thank you very much for that. Look forward to seeing the substantive report. Thank you for the reminder. And yeah, okay, moving on to agenda item 10, the developing economic strategy. Okay. Cheers, Paul.
Thank you, Chair. So my name's Paul Roper, and I'm Cabinet Member for Economic and Cultural Sustainable Development. And a bit of feedback there. Yes, this is an exciting moment. The last economic strategy developed by Baines was back in 2013, so it's 10 years old and is now, I'm sure, very much out of date. It was focused on Bath Quays, I believe. So this is an exciting development in terms that we have a new strategy. I think it's refreshingly compact in size. I was expecting a tome of several hundred pages, but it's around about 26. It's compact. It's also it's been a year in the making, and I think I regard it as a very significant document, as it reflects a lot of the aspirations and commitments of this administration, and more importantly, it's been developed not in a vacuum of officers. It's been developed with some key stakeholders in the city who have been instrumental in the development of it. And I believe the plan is that this document will go to Cabinet in January for adoption, obviously following any feedback from today. So, in terms of the strategy, it is a new approach to local economic development, and it prioritises meeting the needs of all our residents and places whilst reducing the impacts on our natural resources and environment. And it is, I'm told, unique in its development in that it has been informed by the principles of donut economics. And I believe the company that the council has worked with has never developed a policy of this nature based on these principles. So from that point of view, it's unique. In terms of the donut economics, it basically requires a holistic approach to the economy, to sound social foundations and respect for our environment. It's been produced in collaboration with Western Gateway and West of England Combined Authority, and that's enabled us to act as a unified voice, will enable us to act as a unified voice to national government to drive future investment in the authority. It's also been influenced by the Future Ambition Board, which is a mechanism that's set up, I believe, about 2 years ago, which is some of the key stakeholders in the city. So it's the universities, the RUH, I think Borough Happold is one of the leading industrials on there, and their very senior people are involved in the Future Ambition Board, and they've been working in close partnership and have actually influenced a lot of the content. And I have to say it's extremely refreshing to see how those organisations have got involved in this and how enthusiastic they've been about it, and they really have shaped it. Some of the uniqueness is it looks beyond purely economic indicators, and that will enable us to paint a more holistic picture and a more nuanced story of change in time. The strategy is fairly straightforward. It's based around 3 broad themes. The first being infrastructure that supports a green and connected future. The second is innovation that drives a creative and resilient economy. And the third point is opportunity, which is about unlocking a potential for everyone so that it is a more fair and inclusive authority. So the 3 broad themes are supported by what we call the 6 strategic pillars, which you will have read in the paper, and I'll summarise them. Creating a greener economy, working towards net zero and is nature positive. Support our residents so they get access to good quality of work that's well paid. Establishing Baines as a centre of inclusive innovation and creativity. Creating resilient businesses by building a diverse, creative and sustainable base. We attempt to address housing affordability to ensure residents have access to high quality homes, and will support stronger places by building resilience and sharing prosperity more fairly. So, in summary, this is a new strategy that is setting our ambition and direction for the next 10 years. It's unique in the principles on which it's based. I believe, having read it many times, I think it's a very sound plan. It's compact, it's impressive and comprehensive, and it does not use the normal measures of economic growth to measure its success. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? Holly.
Thank you very much, Councillor Roper. Councillor Henman, Walcott Ward. I think you've mentioned very helpfully the principles around the donut framing of this and sort of social foundations, the planetary boundaries. I just wondered if you could talk a little bit more about how this allows Baines to set that sort of economy of the future. You've talked about the green economy. What are some of the opportunities there? Because it's not just about saying we need to mitigate and reduce climate change, but actually looking at what's the potential to be a leader in creating the new industries that can shape the future. It'd be good to hear a bit more about that. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. I think what this is about is setting our stall out as to what we want to achieve as an authority, and ultimately it relies on businesses and organisations wanting to join with or agree with the journey that we want to take this authority on, and by creating an environment and a framework and an aspiration that they aspire to themselves. There's an awful lot of pressure now on organisations for CSG, ESG, I think. And so we're setting our stall out as to what we want to achieve with our green targets, with our journey to net zero, with our aspirations on real living wage, and it is there's never any guarantee on these things, but we are hoping that the organisations will want to invest in this region because they will want to be associated with these principles, which we think set us out as a point of difference to other authorities. I hope that's a reasonable answer.
Helmut Fee, Keynsham East. I wanted to pick up on the stats here, and you, as a businessman, you'll be aware, but our economy has grown at a significantly slower rate than the rest of the UK, 3.8% locally, compared to 21.8% nationally. We've been told that growth is important for wealth, and the way we're set up, we're not seeing it. Can I ask what your plans are to bring up the growth rate?
Thank you, Councillor McPhee. So are the figures you're relating to on the GVA, gross value added? Okay. So that's quite a hard question to answer. The strategy in itself doesn't focus specifically on GVA. It's not the end goal above all others, and we recognise it's a statistic in itself. I think it has to be interpreted with a slight pinch of salt. I'm not an expert on GVA. If Sophie, you want to pipe in on this. I did speak to Metro Dynamics, one of the people helping with this paper, about these statistics on GVA and also salaries. I wouldn't set too much store by it because we have a pretty unique set of circumstances in Baines. We have a very high proportion of residents who don't work, who are comparatively wealthy. We also have a fairly high dependency on the food and beverage sector and the tourism sector, which is relatively low paid. And those sectors have been fairly static in terms of growth. And also, if you look at what's happened over the years in Baines is that we have lost a lot of our key industrial players, sadly, over the years, and you can list them. But the MOD has gone for a number of years. So, yes, it's true to say that our growth has not been as high as other areas, but I don't think we're going to measure the success of this strategy on the GVA figures alone. I'm not entirely sure I've answered your question, Councillor.
Well, I guess what I was looking for was you setting out your stall and saying where we've got the Somerdale Enterprise Zone. You and I both believe we should have something around Keynsham or up there as well, and I just don't see that, and I think it's a gap, and we need to make sure that we have that stall set out in the local plan as well.
Well, obviously, certainly the Summer Valley Enterprise Zone is part of one of the key pillars, and we are attempting to drive green industries and fintech and innovation. Innovation and creation is a very important part of that. How those industries actually reflect through to GVA, which is the point I was probably making badly, it's not clear to me. I'm not an expert on GVA. It's not clear to me how that will affect GVA, but obviously we are attempting to drive our I won't call it industrial, but our innovation space, and using Bath Quays South, for example. That's an area that we're already been successful with, but also the Summer Valley Enterprise Zone, as you've mentioned.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure whether this document is amendable in the sense of the comments we're making are going to lead to a Mark II version, but I've got some comments in case it is. The first is that I've banged on in other fora about the electricity issue, electricity supply, and I think there needs to be something in here discussing the grid connection issue and the backlog and the difficulty both of connecting solar farms on our less productive land and on connecting electricity usage for cars, vehicles, anything else, heat pumps. Our strategy is going to be very dependent on a successful expansion of grid connections. My second thought was around affordable housing. And when we talk about affordable housing, what we're usually meaning is discounted price housing, capturing land value increases through Section 106. But I think we also need to think about affordable housing in the sense of making market price housing more affordable for those entering the market, which means moderating any demands for gold plating planning requirements. It may mean concentrating on playing with the rules about habitable rooms and dwellings per hectare to make sure that the housing that's built is right-sized for the families who are going to use it, and generally bearing down on cost growth in the construction sector. My third thought was about skills. I don't think there's enough reflection in there about the role of WECA and the regional mayor in terms of his skills development and working with the FE sector in particular, and I'd like to see something a bit more in there about that. And the fourth thought came from the reference to a riverside innovation corridor. The council's got a large block at Lewis House, which is not very much used, and it seems to me that we need to see a strategy about the council's corporate rather than commercial property portfolio. I mentioned to you earlier that I'd like to see us as a scrutiny panel having a look at the corporate portfolio to make sure we're freeing up any spaces that could be part of that innovation corridor. Thank you. I don't think I need much of a response to that. All the points have been noted.
I'm pleased to hear that, because there are some big topics there, Toby, but the points are duly noted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's really useful. I hope it's going to be a really useful document, and I quite like the thought of what Toby suggested, that it might not be the final version. We might have some input into it, or some suggestions. I was thinking of the metrics that come out of the report. It is very positive, pulls a lot of things together, and we've got our 10 metrics at the end, but they do strike me as things we are going to do anyway, most of them. A list of things we plan to do, and I wondered whether each of the to start we will sections with colons, if they were boxed or highlighted, I think they wouldn't be so lost in the narrative, and you might feel that they actually had to be delivered as each as a paragraph, and then to start we will with some bullet points, and it would be nice to see those things kind of all being ticked off. And then I just had some small questions, obviously thinking of residents looking at this and making sense of it, and so that's what our role is, to ask those questions on their behalf, and there's quite a few things I didn't understand what they were, and maybe Sophie could answer that. So page 13, what's B Corp status in relation to sustainability? I've never heard of that term. Baines Homes, capital H, local... build up as a local registered provider. Is Baines Homes, is that an officer, is that a council initiative? And on page 22 they refer to what is done in Cambridge, but not in relation to anything in terms of working with public sector partners to establish requirements for the housing needs as in Cambridge. I just wondered what amazing thing had been done in Cambridge. And finally, how do you create a riverside tech and innovation corridor linking Manvers Street to Bath Quays? How would you practically influence that to create that corridor?
Hello, I'm Sophie Broadfield. I'm Director of Sustainable Communities, so I'll just answer those questions, Councillor Hodge. So in terms of what's a B Corp, let's say a designation that's independent of the council that businesses can achieve, which shows that they're on track to positively contribute to being net zero and nature positive. So we want to attract more businesses like that into our area. In terms of Baines Homes, that's the council's own policy to create Baines Council-owned social housing. So that's our programme to build that up over time. In terms of what happened in Cambridge, that's really helpful. That clearly that needs to be made clearer in the document. And I suppose to add to what Councillor Simon was saying, no, this is a draft, and we will absolutely use the comments you make to improve upon it. So thank you for those. But what it's referring to in Cambridge is a development on the edge of the city that was a partnership between the council there and the university. So the university used its land to build a new extension to Cambridge, which is called Eddington, which is generally understood to be a very high-quality housing development. And a lot of that housing was safeguarded for key workers in the University of Cambridge. So it's that model, which again Councillor Simon mentioned, of how do you make sure that housing is accessible to the workers you need in your economy. And the final question you asked was about the Riverside Tech and Innovation Corridor. How would we go about doing that? Well, again, connects to what Councillor Simon raised about Lewis House as an example. We own land and property along the river, and our partners own land and property along the river. The partners mentioned in the Future Ambition Board. So we can use the local plan to influence what that land is used for, because we can designate land for certain purposes. We can also then use our own land and develop it in a certain direction. And through doing that, we influence our place and the future of our economy. So what the economic strategy does is says we're going to prioritise these things when we then make those decisions about our land.
Thank you, Chair. Like you, Councillor Roper, I was quite pleased it was 26 pages or whatever. But actually my concern is detail. And looking at this, my first impression was a wish list. And setting out a plan's great, and it's 10 years since the last one. It's good to have forward vision, and I appreciate that. But the hows and the whys weren't answered for me in so many different bits and pieces, and I don't want to start rambling on and asking for answers on all of them now, but it's trying to understand some of those key comments that are in here, and why is that affecting us, and what is the impact it has, and how we're going to improve that through these 10 points that we've put there, our 10-point delivery plan. Affordable housing, it doesn't say how that's going to happen. And as an employer, I know how painful it is to have anybody employed locally, even paying sensible and good wages. It's a really difficult one, and there isn't a magic wand for that one, but putting it in there as a statement, but not giving us any indication as to how, it makes it sound like a wish list. We've had a third less businesses started in this period, as noted in here, but we've had 50% higher residence growth. Why? That doesn't seem to equate to me. And we're obviously not paying those residents in work at the level that they need to sustain. So that's coming out from here. But there's no reason why. I saw with interest that, again, we've trotted out the fact that we're #1 for micro businesses in the UK, and I thought that figure had been debunked months ago at another scrutiny panel, where it actually was recognised that two numbers have been added up incorrectly. It's been trotted out again, but either way, it doesn't say why we are this centre for micro businesses. Because if we understood it, then we might be able to see how we grow it, or how we develop it from a mom and pop, maybe a consultant business, into an employer business. But it's understanding that side. Looking at our influence on South Keys, I've got no detail, and we still have been very light on detail as how effective is South Keys and Europe Works being at attracting business, because I see empty floors, and what impact are we having on that growth opportunity. 5G, full fibre, we're obviously lacking, but what are the true things that we're going to be able to influence in the next 10 years to make this up to speed? If not better than others, at least be delivering where others' economy can actually deliver 5G. I can't find a network provider that allows me to answer my phone in my office. It's bonkers. And that's what we don't address those things. Solar enterprise is, I get all of it, but I'm trying to understand the transportation side of it and how that links into the sustainability and green bit. And that's my comments, is pulled all sorts of things out of here, understanding who collaborated with you. Was it the institutions that are collaborating some of the input into this, or was it really the businesses? How close are we to the businesses in the city and the wider authority area to really understand what their needs are and what's going on? We just lost a business last week, been in the city for 10 years, reduced its headcount, and 37 jobs went last week. How close were we to understanding that, to seeing how that was supported, and what impact does it have across our authority? So I'm really pleased we've got a report or a plan, but maybe I would like to have 200 pages.
Thank you. Malcolm Treeby. A few questions. First of all, KPIs on there. First of all, great that we got some KPIs on there, but I think only one of them, which is the net zero, is quantitative, and it would be, I think it's important if you're having indicators in there that there is some quantitative stuff against those. Otherwise, it become very easy things to go and meet. You mentioned earlier in terms of the stats on this, that this was a different sort of approach to an economic strategy. We have already got ecological and climate strategies, and they are good and important things. Shouldn't the primary focus of an economic strategy be on growing the economy within both? And the last thing on there, which I had on there, it said we were well served by road and rail links. I think we are well served by rail links, but I would question how we could come to the assumption that we're well served by road links. We're the only city along the M4, which isn't served by a dual carriageway, and the connections into the city make it difficult and things as well. And if we're going to go and attract firms which are beyond that micro size, don't we need that sort of connectivity as well?
Thank you, Chair. Well, thank you for presenting this paper. It's really interesting, all the 10 points. I just got a couple of questions. The first one, how does this strategy incorporate sustainable and inclusive practice for long-term economic stability? And the second one more goes to Councillor Toby's point as well. How are we going to address development of human capital, including education and skill training programs? So it will be great to see a bit more detail. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. If I could answer the second question first, and then I might ask Sophie to answer the first question. So, in terms of human capital, there is I won't call it an organisation. There's a project that the council is working on with funding from WECA, which is called the Forward Project, which is it's a collaboration with Bath Spa University and Bath University. Was it just Bath Spa?
Both universities.
Both universities, and we are developing a syllabus and looking at also creating the space to develop syllabuses in four particular areas, which I can tell you because I've written them down on a piece of paper because I thought this might come up. So the four strands being developed by the Forward Project are sustainability, digital, health, and employability skills. And we've had, I think it's either 700,000 or 900,000 pounds worth of funding from WECA. It's seed funding to develop the project to the point of delivery, where we've actually developed prospectuses for each of these different strands, and I believe there's going to be a trial of it's about educate. It's 18. Is it 18 plus? Sophie, forgive me. There's a lot of detail to this. And it's about upskilling people and retraining people in these four strands. So the Forward Project is one part of it. There is also a scheme which used to be called iStart, and I think it's now called Skills Pod. Is it? Sorry, forgive me.
We have an employment and skills pod that collects together all of our skills support for individuals, depending on whether you're at the beginning of your career or you're in your career and you want to change jobs or start your own business. We have a lot of advice and support available to people, which is a lot in partnership with WECA and the West of England Combined Authority, and we offer that in something called an employment and skills pod. It rotates around the libraries in Bath and North East Somerset, and anyone can make an appointment to go and get that support. So we have quite a lot of those things that provide that human capital development. You asked another question that Councillor Roper suggested I might answer, which is how does this create the long-term sustainability to our economy? And I guess that's fundamentally the point of having an economic strategy. What some of the things that in the data which Councillor Blackburn pointed out are relatively lower business growth in our area, more resident growth. We lose land to new housing rather than to business premises. If we do nothing, there's a risk that that continues, and that ours is an economy that relies on people commuting out to London or to Bristol for work, and we don't have the jobs here. So the idea of the economic strategy is to arrest some of that and to set a new future, and that's what is described in the vision and the economic strategy.
I have a couple of comments myself. Thank you for the report. It is aspirational, I think, as Colin said, but it is a bit of a wish list. Can I suggest as well, when it comes to the point that was made by Hal earlier, I understand how the point about if you're looking at comparative GVA and you're looking at comparative growth, how it's important to look at quality, not necessarily quantity, but the figures are so substantially behind what growth is nationally. I think there needs to be some kind of commentary, because when this is published, that is what is going to be what is going to be picked up. And I'd be interested to see growth and GVA figures compared to the rest of England and Wales minus London, because I know that sometimes London figures can skew. That will give us a comparison. But it isn't just a couple of points behind, isn't it? If we're looking at growth at 3.8 compared to a national 21.8, we are talking about a substantial gap there. I don't think that there is mention of rural versus city. I don't think there's enough emphasis given to the fact that Baines is quite an unusual authority in that it does have a major urban hub, but with a rural hinterland around. It is different from the majority of other local authorities. And certainly when mentions being made, and I think this is a little bit bat-centric in some of the areas that are mentioned, when you're looking at deprivation and how deprivation, understandably, Twerton and Whiteway are mentioned because they are poor areas in a large city, but deprivation indices being such that they are, that I think you need to dig down to the super output areas to look at some of the parts of Midsummer Norton, Keynsham, Radstock, Westfield, where there are substantial pockets of deprivation, but there isn't the global numbers just simply because those towns are smaller. And I think that there needs to be a reflection about that. I'd also that there are two areas that are reappearing, if you want. One is about tourism and one is about digital connectivity. I can remember, sadly, over 10 years ago being in this chamber when the coalition was looking at the proposed improvements to rural broadband, and there was some survey work done in Baines as a whole. And one surprising figure that came out was the number of small businesses that were being run out of people's front rooms, and how you could actually support those businesses when they moved out of people's front rooms into larger premises. And back a step, those small businesses were saying that it was upload and download speeds on broadband was a real issue for them. The rollout of rural broadband didn't happen as hoped. Those connectivity problems still exist out in North East Somerset in particular. And maybe if we're drilling down to that's the growth in small businesses, is that those businesses are still being held back in North East Somerset. And I'd also say as well that was before COVID and before the whole home working growth. And I know working from home, the language and the frustration at 10 in the morning or 5 in the evening when everyone switches on their Netflix, or certainly 5 in the evening coming back from school or work or whatever, is still a problem, remains a problem, and needs to be sorted out if we're going to look at supporting small businesses and working from home in North East Somerset. Similarly with the tourism sector, it has been and I'd say it's a sustainability and an environmental issue as well, is that there are a lot of people who visit Bath for the day. That creates your traffic problem coming in and out. It certainly doesn't necessarily support the hotel and the food and drink sector as much as it could do. And, out in North East Somerset and the Mendips, we do have beautiful places to visit, And how do we sell the idea of Bath and North East Somerset as a tourism destination for more than just a day, 2 days, 3 days? But looking at it as the report as a whole, I mean, one theme that comes through, I have to say, is the Somer Valley Enterprise Zone as an answer to a lot of problems. And I have to say that I'm certainly not convinced it is an answer. I think we need to remind ourselves that I think one of the reasons for the delay in that decision going back to January is the final, was it the last consultation, which has seen particularly local communities and parish councils, and I suppose I need to declare an interest as parish clerk at Farrington Gurney at this point, where the local communities were very supportive of the idea of creating high quality jobs in the Somer Valley, but the actual details have come out in the local development order have actually turned that overall support into outright opposition, to be blunt, in many cases. And the question is being asked about, will the enterprise zone actually take businesses away from the high street in Midsummer Norton, for example? Will the zone just help with that merry-go-round of businesses who decide to relocate from one place into the enterprise zone from somewhere else, so it's not actually creating new businesses or expanding? And in particular, the Somer Valley Enterprise Zone is a development on a greenfield site when less than a mile down the road we have Welton Bibby, which is a brownfield site and has been empty and has needed development for at least a decade, probably longer. And I don't think there's any reflection in there to the failure of the Wansdyke Business Centre and what lessons were learnt from that. If that couldn't work, then how is the enterprise zone going to work? Across to you.
Thank you, Chair. Quite a lot of points raised there. I'd like to come back to some of the wider comments first, if I may, and come back and try and address. I won't be able to address all your points, I don't think, but I'll try and address some of them. In terms of wish list, I think that's a fair statement. That doesn't mean that you don't set out your strategy, and I think we're all aware of the acute pressures that councils, local authorities across England are under at the moment because of 10 years of austerity under this current government. So the amount of financial flexibility that the council has got to deliver on this strategy is very low at the moment. But that doesn't mean that we don't come up with a strategy. We have to have a plan. And one of the key things that this strategy will do is it will give us access to or far greater possibilities of success with grant funding. So if you start talking about WECA, about green community bonds, UK Share Prosperity Fund, I don't know what money is available right now in the current economic cycle, but grant funding will become available. There will be some now, availability now, there will be some in future. And my understanding is how this works is that these organisations that gift this grant funding will come to Baines, and they won't just talk to the council, they will talk to the key stakeholders and businesses in the city, small and large. And if they are, this is what I'm being told, that if we have an economic strategy, that the key stakeholders have bought into that economic strategy, which they have, then our chances of getting successful funding applications are increased very significantly. So no strategy, no opportunity to funding. A sound strategy, a good opportunity to get funding. I'd like to think also that in the next 10 years the poverty in which all these councils are operating will change. I'd like to see a change of government and a complete refinancing of local government so we can actually finance some of the things that we need to do. So wish list, yes, some of it is a wish list, but we are doing some of these things. In response to Bath Quays South, I can't share with you the details, but I'm told that we are extremely close to letting the vast majority of the space there now, and if those deals are successful, I think we'll only be left with half a floor still to let. And I'm afraid I can't comment on Newark Works because I'm afraid I don't know anything about it. But I think it's regarded as a success, and I think the bridge across the river that we've done and the work that we're now doing on the riverside there, we're finally finishing that off. I think it's a great improvement. So it is a wish list in some senses, but we do have a 10-point delivery plan. We are doing some of that already, and clearly as funding comes available, we will do more of it. In terms of some of the points you made, Chair, I think you talked about the deprivation in Midsummer Norton, Radstock and Westfield, and you also spoke about the Summer Valley Enterprise Zone. I think there are different opinions on the SVES, and I think there's also some contradictions as well in the arguments as to why some people don't want to do it. I completely get that they don't want it there, but you can't claim deprivation in Midsummer Norton and Radstock and Westfield and at the same time saying we don't want to put in 33 acres of exemplary industrial office space which will create 1,000 to 1,300 jobs in hopefully high-tech and innovative industries. And that region has suffered for decades over the loss of key employers such as Pennell's, which has gone and is now housing, so there's nowhere for people to work. I think Pennell's used to employ 5,000 people. That region used to be almost entirely self-sustaining in terms of its employment, with multiple generations working in the same factories. It's all gone, and they're now all commuting. And the argument that there is no demand for industrial and office space in that area is not proven. What I do know is that when businesses are looking for space, they cannot engage with a space that might be delivered in 3 to 5 years' time that may or may not get planning permission. What they can engage with is schemes like that are being developed in Chippenham, on Junction 17, on the Modman estate, and all the schemes that are being developed on the M49 down by Portbury and in the corridor up towards the Severn Crossing, where schemes are there, space is available, either the space is built or there's the permission to build these spaces, and all those businesses are going to go to that space because it's deliverable. What SVES is about with this LDO is taking away the planning risk to businesses that are looking to move that area, taking the planning risk away, but at the same time we've got a framework around which what type of businesses can actually go on that site. And I think that's a very important point. And in terms of the delivery of SVES, we have not yet determined how those units will be developed. If the scheme goes forward, because it has not been adopted, but if the scheme goes forward, the council, as the owner, can, if we choose to do so, actually be directly involved in the development of those sites. We do not have to sell them off to developers who in turn will develop the site. That is a decision for a later date. So, whilst I accept that we have to take some greenfield site out of it, the Welton Bibby site has been discounted. That is earmarked for housing and a supermarket. It is not an appropriate space in the view of some to develop a large industrial space. It's right in the centre of Midsummer Norton and it's not appropriate. The decision to locate SVES where it is was taken, I think, in 2007 as a designated enterprise zone. And just as a final point, the delay in the decision is not caused by the quantity of feedback is caused by the fact the consultation was extended until the 26th of October, and to get the papers to Cabinet a week before the Cabinet, they would have had to produce the results of the report by, I think, 29th or 30th, so they literally had 3 days to turn it around. So in summary, it's not all about, our strategy is not all about SFES, but a certain pillar of it, SFES is one of our key zones. This authority has so little space to encourage industrial development. You go north, you get to the motorway, and you're in South Gloucestershire. You go east a very short distance, you're in Wiltshire. You've got AONB all over the place. So our opportunities to actually take control, which we're trying to do, and develop an industrial space, they're very few. And I'm, much as I accept that some of the local people don't want to see SFES where it is, I think it's a very important part of the council strategy for developing industrial and office space. And I've probably said too much. My apologies.
Thank you for that. And I know the discussions about SFES will continue. Just pick up on one point. You made the point that there's areas of deprivation within the Soma Valley and the relationship to SFES. Deprivation is not necessarily and wholly a consequence of worklessness. I think that the issues around there, and certainly our local food banks, are showing people in full-time work using those food banks, and it's skills, upskilling, education and the rest. So just make that point. But thank you for that. I'm sure it was a very enjoyable... Sorry.
I was just going to say in response to that, Councillor Moss, that's why a pillar of the strategy is around good work. Good pay for work is a really fundamental part of the prosperity of our place.
Thank you. And if we move on now to the medium-term financial strategy.
Just going to have a move round of chairs. So it occurs to me I didn't introduce myself earlier. For anybody who doesn't know, Mark Elliott, I'm Cabinet Member for Resources. And apologies to anyone who listened to my Cabinet presentation on the medium-term financial strategy, because a lot of this will be repeating myself, but I think it's important to provide some context. The committee will be aware that systemically local government finance is pretty broken, that a number of councils have recently issued Section 114 notices, essentially declaring themselves bankrupt. Thankfully, we're not one of them, and I'm confident we're not going to be one of them. But before 2018, there were only 3 Section 114 notices had ever been issued, going back to 1988. And since 2018, 12 have been issued, and these have been across the political spectrum. So the system is fundamentally broken, and central government is devoid of any ideas as to how to sort it out. We've got problems going back over more than a decade, local councils having to deal with increasingly difficult situation. First austerity measures, meaning a vast reduction in central government funding, then Brexit, then COVID, then war in Ukraine, spiralling inflation, and now the conflict in Israel-Palestine, and we don't know what effect that's going to have and how long that's going to last. In order to understand why these pressures are so exceptionally damaging to local councils and why they're difficult to deal with, we do need to remind ourselves how councils are funded. So our budget is split between revenue and capital, and the two are kept very separate. So you've got revenue for operating costs and capital for land and equipment and buildings. And for very good reasons, they're kept very separate, and we're not allowed to spend capital money on revenue. I think there's an understandable perception amongst the public that council tax pays for council spending, but in reality, council tax covers about a third of our operating cost, the operating cost only, and virtually none of the capital cost. Our operating costs are roughly 300 million, and our council tax income this year is set to be 113 million. So the rest of the operating income comes from grants from central government and things that we charge for, services, car parking, room and baths, property rental, that kind of thing. So, to pick out some elements why that causes us difficulty, Baines residents benefit from the fourth lowest council tax in the South West, but council tax rises are capped at 4.99%, including the social care precept. So when you've got inflation running into double figures, that obviously means that that third of the budget that's funded by council tax isn't keeping up with the rise in costs. With regard to central government funding, in 2013, our revenue support grant, which is the general fund granted to councils to run their operations, was £31 million. 10 years later, this year, it is £800,000. We do get grants for one-off specific purposes, but this is inflexible and costly, and you'll have heard Councillor Roper talk about grant funding and the importance of having a strategy in order that we can apply for grant funding. It involves working up competitive bids for pots of cash. It pits one council against another, and it takes a lot of officer time, and it's difficult to plan because the money isn't guaranteed. The pressures on spending, particularly in social care, are enormous. To give some examples, the budget for children's social care was roughly 50 million this year, which was a significant increase on last year, but we still look like overspending that by £5 million this year. The number of looked after children has risen from 197 on the 1st of April 2022 to 245 today, so that's a 25% increase in 18 months. The number of education and healthcare plans has gone up from 1,185 in 2018 to 2,181 today, so that's doubled in 5 years. That has consequent impacts on things like home-to-school transport, where we've got huge cost pressures. So we're left in a position of very high rises in costs, very little room to manoeuvre with regard to income raising, and after years and years of this kind of pressure, very little room for efficiency. Nevertheless, there are some small points of light. I'd like to point out that we benefit from a city which attracts a lot of visitors, and things like the Roman Baths have bounced back brilliantly. We're expecting over 1 million visitors to the Baths this year, and that will bring 10 million in profit to the council, which goes to help alleviate at least a small amount of the pressure that we're experiencing in the authority. And on top of that, we do have an exceptionally capable and dedicated finance team, and despite the very gloomy situation, we aim to keep providing our frontline services, protecting the most vulnerable in society, hence schemes like the Council Tax Support Scheme revision, and importantly to deliver on our manifesto promises. So I'm sure you can see that the picture I'm setting is not easy, but I'm confident that we will be able to navigate this extremely difficult situation. So having set out the general context, the specific medium-term financial strategy report sets out the priorities for financing over the next 5 years and the strategic direction. It goes into a lot of detail covering the kinds of issues I've just set out around cost pressures and funding. It says that this year we're currently predicting to overspend our revenue budget by 6.5 million. For context, that's about 2% of the revenue budget. By far the main reason for this is pressures on social care. Children's services alone coming in at 4.6 million over budget. We are in the process of taking some urgent recovery action to make sure that position is brought back in line. We're implementing vacancy management, which means holding a period where we don't recruit on roles that are not essential in meeting our statutory duties for a temporary period to help reduce our monthly pay costs. We've introduced corporate controls where we're utilising our financial systems to enable additional security over our new contract expenditure that could be challenged or reduced or delivered in a different way or more cost effectively. We're pausing and reducing spending in discretionary areas such as non-essential training, conferences, travel, subscriptions, that kind of thing. And I hope that everyone would agree that given the situation, these are proportional measures to take so that we land in a balanced position at the end of the financial year. The report also sets out, importantly, our funding gap over the next 5 years, the difference between the amount we're predicting to spend and the amount of income we expect to receive. And that's just over 17 million next year, and the following year it's 5 million, and a total gap of 35 million over the next 5 years. There are already some savings identified over the next 2 years in the report of 1.74 million. That still leaves us a 23.19 million gap to find, and we are working hard on that now. That is most of my job at the moment. Section 10 of the report sets out the principles that we will use in setting budgets to eliminate the gap, and Section 11 sets out the priorities we'll adopt when making our decisions. It also sets out the timetable for the budget process. So we'll have a finalised budget coming to Council, as usual, in February. And I'm confident that we will hit that timescale and deliver a balanced budget proposal to Council on time. At that point, I'd like to hand over to Andy if he's got any comments to make.
Thank you, Councillor Elliott, and I'm Andy Weatherby, the Council's Chief Financial Officer. So I think in terms of the reports, Councillor Elliott has covered most of the points. I think just a reminder for the panel that the financial strategy does set out the context and the challenge. It's not the report that sets out the solutions. That comes with the full budget proposal, and that work's underway at the moment. I think just the additional things to add is the report does really crystallise the current economic climate. Ongoing inflation, so the current CPI level is around 6.3%. Tomorrow there'll be an announcement on the latest figures for inflation, and that will obviously influence our thinking on the budget. And the Bank of England interest rate has sustained at 5.25%. So that does make things, financially at a cost level and an income management level more challenging for the Council. And that has represented and crystallised itself in the numbers we present. I think the other thing to note is really in terms of managing the strategy. We've got a robust set of budget principles and a historic and good track record of managing our finances and BANES. The last 3 or 4 years, revenue budget outturns have been on budget, and there has been challenges in those years that have been managed also. And that's the discipline we will really continue to put in place when we manage our ongoing finances. So I think that's probably just a few extra points for myself.
Questions?
So there's two elephants in the room. One is adult and one is children. And children seems to be more of a problem in terms of expenditure. And I remember when I came in 2019 being told that we spent more per unit on children. And that's 5 years ago, and we're still in that state. So my question, I suppose, is number one, can you give us some assurances that you will do something about it this year? And number two is, can we have it as a scrutiny item, or is that really, there's another body that should do that? But it seems to me important enough in terms of the money involved for corporate to get a sight of what's going on.
I'm happy to agree to come back to PDS with a report on children's budget. I think that's fine, and absolutely we are focused on what we can do to get control of that budget, because the rises are absolutely astronomical. I mean, in percentage terms, it is considerably more pressure than any other department. So and a lot of that is external pressure. I don't want to downplay that. It's going to be very, very difficult because there is huge rising genuine pressure on that department, and we are not being properly funded by central government to cover it. It's not like there is funding backing up the incredible increase in demand, but absolutely we do need to press down on it as well. I mean, we absolutely have to get control of it, because otherwise it will run away.
Thank you. The City of Bath has got a significant number of higher education students. A lot of them, when they graduate, can't afford to stay in the city because house prices are expensive because of the number of residential properties that are HMOs. Students don't pay council tax. How disadvantaged is BANES as a local authority because of the exponential growth in student numbers? Are we getting the support from central government to compensate for the lack of council tax payments that would otherwise be made by those households?
No, there isn't compensation for that. I mean, I don't want to be completely negative about students, and I think that having two universities in the city is an extremely valuable thing and adds to the cultural life of the city, adds to the... it means that we have got students here who as you say, it's very difficult for them to remain, but some of them do, and I think that adds to the vibrancy of the city. So I don't want to be completely down on students, but economically, yes, it is difficult that 30% of our population during term time is a student population, and that means that the council tax take is reduced, and we are not compensated for that. That's true.
I mean, as I say, they are service users, just like every other
absolutely. They are service users, and there isn't income associated with that. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, I'm used to this local government rhythm where in the autumn we get a medium-term financial strategy that shows that there's an enormous gap to fill. Somehow finance directors usually and members usually manage to come up with a working budget by the time we get to February. But I think I'd just like to understand a bit better one particular area, and that's SEND spending, because I'm not familiar with this safety valve arrangement and how the ring fencing of the school's budget. I mean, I thought that the school's budget was an entirely pass-through arrangement, and it seems to have moved away from that with these SEND pressures. So if Andy could give a bit of an explanation about that, it would be rather helpful.
Thank you, Councillor Simon. So the SEND pressures, whilst almost the administration and the management of that service sits with the council, the funding of it comes from the Dedicated Schools grant. So there's the high needs block element. So part of the overall Dedicated Schools grant is for funding schools and almost passporting money to schools, and the element of it comes to the council for funding SEND provision. So that is something that's a responsibility of the council, because there's additional services for children with SEND. So that's an area that's fallen within the remit of the safety valve and the DFE, because of so many councils have got themselves into deficit on SEND, because it's almost held like a kind of a separate account from our general funds. So any overspend in SEND is ring-fenced to that area, because it's a ring-fenced fund within the DSG. Because the pressures have become so high, as I touched on, many councils have come into deficit, so the Department for Education has come up with a safety valve programme, which is it's really a funding package that does address some of that deficit, but through direct conversation with the DFE, the plan is to get yourself out of deficit and into a balanced position over a course of time. So Bath North East Somerset is in that programme, and we have a plan that demonstrates over time how to bring the cost of SEND provision in line with the funding allocations we get from within the Dedicated Schools grant. It's not without its challenges. I mean, demand is extremely high in this area, and costs are going up all the time.
Yeah, and we are planning to. The problem with improving that situation is that it needs quite long-term planning, because you need to be able to build in area facilities that don't exist at the moment. And obviously it's better for the children if we can provide those facilities in area, but it's also financially better if we can provide those facilities in area. And there's capital work ongoing to help provide those services, but obviously that takes time.
If we're talking about needing to invest capital to reduce revenue spending, the other area where there is a big shortage is specialist accommodation for children in care who need non-fostering care. Is there a regional programme to construct enough accommodation so that those services can be provided?
I wouldn't say there's a adopted and live regional programme that's identifying almost properties and then creating a joint sort of capital initiative across the region. All councils are talking about this. So individually, I think every council, and definitely the councils within the West of England Combined Authority, are looking at how they, through their capital strategy and also through their service plans, can start identifying provision that could be brought into use from council properties. but it's early. I'd say that we're doing that also, but it's at that point of working up the proposal and taking a business case forward. It's not adopted as a firm plan with the building yet, and that's similar with our neighbours. But I think we're all having the same conversations because I think it's apparent that the cost of out of county or just general out of area is really high cost, so there needs to be, in terms of ongoing sufficiency, more provision locally.
Thank you, Chair. Just really want to firstly pick up Ian's point earlier, just regarding the revenue support grant was something that when I was first brought into council 8-9 years ago, everyone said, but that's all covered by that. It's a national policy, and you can't bang on about it because we get the RSG.
And I cannot repeat enough.
That's completely
31 million down to 800,000.
So what are we doing specifically on that point from a representation point of view? There will be some other councils around the country that may be having similar pain, but we certainly are getting a huge amount of service use and nothing for it. In the hope that there is a new government in sometime in the not too distant future, what representations are we putting together now to try and actually distance ourselves from this national policy? We don't want to disadvantage our universities in attracting the students to come, but we have to. It is another elephant in the room. It has to be looked at, and that huge loss that was meant to compensate us, we're just left holding the baby. We just need to be shouting from the rooftop, and I'd like to know what we're going to do about it.
Absolutely. I mean, I've got some comments, but if you...
Yeah, I can update, I totally agree. And in terms of the kind of the measure, when we look at all of the income we generate in the council, when we add up business rates, council tax and grant, it's called our core spending power, and that's used to benchmark councils in terms of government settlements. So has our core spending power gone up in line with inflation? That's kind of a national measure that's used. If we analyse ourselves against core spending power versus kind of head of population, we're in the lowest 20 councils for unitaries. So we have become part of a group called the F20 group that's got the the other councils who are in the low 20, and letters have been written to government stressing these points. We haven't had a direct offer of more funding yet. We await that, but we are doing what we can to lobby it and really identify the fact that we are an outlier council in terms of our core spending power.
I think it's also fair to say that there have been conversations with potential incoming government. I think the chances of us getting anything sensible out of the current government is just nil. They are so devoid of any ideas, and they are completely out of all steam. They have nothing left, and so I'm afraid, conversations with potential future government is probably more productive, and certainly I know some of those conversations have happened.
Chair, if I may carry on, that's all right. We make the play. It's great to hear how we've recovered from inherited services. It's fantastic, and obviously the recognition from a parking point of view. However, we've created that uplift. It's there. It benefits everybody from a council point of view. But there's another key pillar that we've completely ignored in here, and it's becoming an elephant in the room. Our statement is lower commercial income base. It's the only comment that's made on page 46. There's no mention of the commercial estate of any description, and it's not showing us either past value, current value, or our projected values, because we've just done an economic piece, and that economic piece sticks in something about a fashion museum, which I still struggle to see how it aligns with those other 9 points that were there. But really, we need to understand that in this context of this document, because as councillors we can't scrutinise it. We don't know what's going on with that commercial estate.
Okay. I mean, I'd be happy to bring back report on the commercial estate. I guess I think the commercial estate is performing pretty well. It's not back to pre-COVID levels, but we did work on in the council splitting the corporate and commercial estate so that we can manage the commercial estate better. And the commercial estate is performing pretty well. Vacancy rates are low. It's doing the council-owned commercial estate is doing well. There are various. There are various things happening that I'm hoping are going to be quite good news stories over the next few months with the commercial estate. I think, but if you want it, what you're saying is you want to see some figures, and it doesn't give them.
Yes, sorry, it's just so devoid of any reference to it in this, and it's such a core pillar that we've had for a long period of time that I think it is due a paragraph.
Okay.
Yeah, that's not a problem. And in terms of the budget, I just add a bit of caution on that sustaining existing levels of income is the strategy on the commercial estate. Growing levels of income is challenging, especially with the restrictions around the council being able to borrow to acquire new assets. That's not something that we can do in terms of council borrowing.
Yeah, and also rental values have fallen in commercial property since COVID, and so it is if we push the rental of the property too hard, we get criticised for the vacancies that are then caused. So I mean, it is a question of balance. So and I say I am satisfied that we're doing the officers doing a really good job on managing that estate. But what you're saying is you want more detail, and that's fine. Yes,
it's not a criticism of what we're doing with the commercial estate. It's just understanding what it is, the impact of it.
Yeah.
And when you talk with the St John's in the city, and their now pre-COVID and post-COVID situation and their recovery, then we want to benchmark. We want to see where we're at, and that's important. I'm not sure. Just the other. Maybe slightly flippant point, I'm just picking up on page 63 in terms of how we've highlighted our 4 values, but do we really need to highlight the fact that we're taking bets on this coming off? Because bold, empowered, transparent and supported with capitals. Can you see that on page 63?
Okay. Sorry, what?
It comes up as our core values of putting bets on our future.
Oh, I see.
Maybe unbolding might be
right. Okay,
strategy.
Sure. Sorry, just presentational point. Yes. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, I have a couple of questions for Andy. Just things I wanted to understand. So Mark set out the situation in which we find ourselves, and we're going through the process of having to find savings at the moment and think about what things we had hoped to do to improve, positive things to take forward for residents of Bath and Baines, and what we can continue to deliver, and also that we have had to have a hold on vacancies and stopping discretionary spending at the moment. And I just wanted to be clear on how some things compare to the last time we found ourselves in this position. So in the previous medium-term financial strategy to this, we were in the same sort of position at Q2 with a 5.77 million overspend predicted, and there was I just wondered what the corporate social care contingency is applicable last year, and what is that sum, and that moved our position to a slightly, the actual the overspend to that point. What is that contingency? And it's not relevant this year.
Yeah, you're referring to the social care reserve.
Yeah, it's called the corporate social care contingency, and we had we were looking at an outturn of 5.77 million.
And then
brought it down
I'm with you. So that was a contingency put into last year's budget.
Yeah.
And with the additional cost in children's social care, that budget has been allocated. So that's no longer a corporate contingency we hold. It's been allocated to the service because of the ongoing pressures in children's social care. So it's been expended.
So you address
it's not a mitigation.
Rebasing that. It actually goes into the service for next year, so you can't apply it.
So it's been applied because the costs are ongoing in children's social care. That's been allocated now to the service, so it's not a kind of a corporate budget we can allocate.
Okay, yeah, and what I'm at this time last year we were facing a funding gap of about 19 million, and we came up with savings, and the budget was then predicated on about 14 million of savings. But at that point in time, we didn't seem to have to put in so many corporate controls and the vacancy control and the stop on discretionary spending that we've gone in with this time. We didn't seem to have taken such acute action on it, whereas this year we're not forecasting. It's not a good position, but it's not quite as bad as we were forecasting last year, and we seem to need to take stronger measures.
They're equally challenging years.
Yes,
I'd say more acute this year with the direct pressures on children's services. As Councillor Elliott said, it's around 4.8 million of the 6.5 million forecast overspend, so the need to act earlier, I think, is more apparent this year. Last year, in terms of some of those council-wide measures around vacancy management and really challenging contract spend, they were all put in place. I think from memory, we probably really stepped up that work maybe late December. So really looked at that last quarter of the year to bring things back into balance. But that is late in the year. You really need to do this stuff early when you know the risks there, and that's been highlighted in the Q2 report. So that's why some of these steps are happening a little bit earlier.
And I suppose the key point with the children's is we putting more money into the budget every year, and we're still delivering. We've still got that level of overspend of 5 or 6.
It's exactly that. Is that having rebased it by £5 million into this year, it's still showing another £5 million of pressure, and at the moment isn't showing signs of slowing down. So which is why we need to take pretty urgent action.
And could I just ask two things on the budget planning figures? So the budget rebasing in at 5.74 million, is that 3 for children's, and I'm not sure whether you'd be clear on those figures, Andy, or not really. Probably.
Is it okay if I send the figures to you? They are across all council services, and they are informed by the Q2 outturn position, also where services have got costs that are occurring now that are well in excess of their budget that's allocated in this financial year. I can give you the full breakdown, but a lot of it is in children's services.
Okay. And the budget, we've got a budget adjustment of 3 million. Was that, it's usually a one-off item for the previous year. Is that identified slightly higher than usual coming through as a budget adjustment? But I just
again, and that's highlighted. So that again is we've done an assessment of risk on the budget. So where we look at the budget assumptions section, you can see that we've brought in assumptions around pay and also around contract inflation. We've recognised that there's still a high degree of volatility, so we've done an assessment on the kind of the contingency level we need. So it's kind of touched on the report on that sensitivity analysis also. Where I've put in an analysis on all of the volume-driven volatile areas and what does an extra, kind of 5-10% look like going worse and also getting better. So we've assessed within that range.
Okay, lovely, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Of course, we got like a huge funding gap for the services and rest of the things, and of course, the factors beyond our control, like inflation and the war issues and all other things. But we got like these financial strategies to generate income and to improve resources. if nothing adverse happen in future, of course there is no guarantees. So if nothing adverse happen, so the way we got the current strategies, what sort of time frame we looking at to close that gap?
Yeah, so we are required and aim to set a budget which balances every year. So we have to close the gap in order to set a budget. So next year's gap has to be closed before we bring a budget to council in February. So that gap needs to be. So next year's gap, I think in the report is 17 million. Is that right? Something like that. That gap has to be down to zero by the time we present a budget.
Thank you.
Another rather specific point is about I think there's an increase in planning fees coming. Will that, because of our heavy planning loads, will that improve the position of the planning department, or is it still a net drain on council's finances?
I haven't got the detail of the exact uplift in planning fees, but when we applied this previously, in terms of the planning caseloads, that's always kind of volatile and going up as well. I think I wouldn't say there's a net drain, but I think it's net zero. Usually, in terms of any uplift in fees and planning, are usually expended on covering costs. Also, because of the volatility in planning, quite often agency staff are needed, and they're higher than our establishment, so to clear caseloads, and that is kind of incorporated into the planning fee, which is to cover the overall cost of that assessment of the application.
Thank you, Chair. Just a small point. I mean, it's clearly a challenging picture, but there is some kind of glimmers of hope. I mean, particularly around the heritage services. I wondered if you could talk a bit more about how do we continue to potentially increase that and enhance the growth that we're seeing on the heritage side.
Yeah, sure. And I think I'm delighted with the performance of heritage services. I think that they have managed to not only push up visitor numbers, but actually it's interesting, the visitor numbers are actually not quite up to pre-COVID levels, but the income per visitor they've managed to push up considerably, which means that the income we're predicting next year will be higher than pre-COVID levels, even though the visitor numbers aren't. So they've done a very good job there. They will continue on that work, and I know they're looking at all sorts of measures to make sure that income per visitor, I mean, just things like income from the shop is going up per head. They're looking at the ticket structure price, the structure of the ticket pricing, and when is counted as peak time for pricing and things like that. So that they're looking at that kind of thing. And then you've got the wider strategic things like the Fashion Museum, which over time will add to our heritage offering. So that is a properly world-class collection we've got there. I mean, it is absolutely, it is the best fashion collection, certainly in the country, probably in the world. It's a very, very, very high-class collection. If we get it right, when we get it right, and we produce a world-class museum to put it in, I'm sure that will generate extra income for heritage as well. So there's the short-term stuff around the baths and the way that we're managing that, but there's also the longer-term vision.
A couple of questions. Oh, sorry, Lucy.
Just briefly, before you say thank you for these reports, because we do get very comprehensive figures that allow us to dig down deeply into the same format each year, which I find really useful too. And I think we shouldn't just take for granted the quality and the detail of the reports that come before us, so that we can ask informed questions. Yeah.
Thank you, and all credit to officers on that. That's they're doing a fantastic job.
Echo that, the work that the finance officers and team do. I think, as you said, the context is an extremely difficult time for local governments. Just look to the south, to the new Somerset, and the difficult situation that they've got there. So my questions are in that context. A couple of questions first. I assume that, or the assumption is there that there'll be a allowed 4.99% increase in next year. What guarantees are there from central government? Is there a 5-year plan, or are we waiting on the autumn statement? Or a 5-minute plan with this government?
Well, we're planning on 24-25 being year 2 of a 2-year settlement announcement from the Chancellor.
Okay.
But that does have to be caveated. We are waiting to see what comes out in the autumn statement next week.
Okay. I was interested as well, you mentioned a CSP part of this F20 group. If either now or by email, if you could let us know what other councils are in that group to get some idea of comparison and context, that would just be useful. A couple of comments, and I think it's following on from points that Colin made about the corporate and the commercial estates. Certainly welcome the opportunity to scrutinise that. And probably worth saying, and it's a bit of the elephant in the room, historically the corporate and commercial estates have been reluctant to be scrutinised. We've seen recent examples of, I think, the ones like Business Centre, where they try to exclude councillors from part of that scrutiny process, claiming commercial confidentiality, which I have to say, as chair, I don't accept. So probably the request for more detail and the opportunity for scrutiny is welcomed, but it's kind of based on a degree of scepticism and cynicism as to past history, shall we say. Just leave that there. There's also, and it's useful to see and very welcome to see the figures on how heritage services, the Roman Baths and the rest are doing, and it's interesting that they're looking at how they can maximise income. I know that there has been a concern over years that if you just simply drive up numbers, you actually spoil the quality of the experience, and it's probably interesting to note that some other European cities are actually looking at the numbers of tourists coming into their cities and are trying to quantity rather than quality. And just put that comment there.
I completely agree, and the heritage services are very focused on the quality of the experience at the baths, and I think that I think it's a really, really high quality experience at the baths now. I think they provide a great service, actually. Really, really good.
I think on capital and revenue and looking at adult and children's services, and I think you mentioned that all councillors are having conversations. All councillors have having that conversation for 20 years, as far as I can remember. It would be really great if we could actually come up with a solution rather than a conversation. And I don't mean that to denigrate that.
Sure. And I think whilst we all agree that we've been having that conversation 20 years, I think that it is important to recognise that the pressures over the last 2 or 3 have been extraordinary, even compared to the last 10 or 15 years. I say it's the budget pressures are huge and really do need to be addressed.
Yeah. I just remember 20 years ago I was cabinet member in Bristol for social services, and how 1 or 2 individuals actually totally derail your budget, and that has always been the case. So it would be good if we can use capital money in order to make those revenue savings by not having to pay for out of county and various stuff. Can I ask as well, and it was the point being made about students and income from students. There was a report about a licence levy to student landlords in Middlesbrough, I believe. Could we look at, or do we look at a similar scheme?
I'm not aware of that scheme, so
A landlord in Middlesbrough was complaining that there was a licence levy which he was having to pay £43,000 to the council for student accommodation. And I thought you must have a lot of student accommodation if you're getting £43,000. But it was an interesting idea. And similar to that, and I guess it's looking back to the previous Lib Dem administration under Paul, was looking at an accommodation levy similar to European cities that could be used. I understood that this is being looked at in different parts of the UK, and that the legal barriers maybe aren't there that were a few years back. I know that Edinburgh's looking at it, and I appreciate that's a different country.
Yeah, we'll do some research on the student levies. We need to look into that in terms of the licence. In terms of the other one, I think you touched on the tourist levy. It's been quoted in the press. So Manchester have got a bid that's put in a levy for hotel operators. It is a bit different to maybe what's being portrayed sort of in the press, that it's not a tourist levy as such. It's a specific levy where people pay an additional charge when staying in hotels, and that goes into the ring-fence pot within the bid to reinvest in the hotels. And that's the reason why it's allowed, because it is a bid charge for running that bid, and it is put back into that sector. It's different to a general tourist levy, which would be viewed as a tax, and that would be that's why it isn't able to be put in place at the moment, because that would be a tax raised, and that would go to government as the collector of tax, not councils.
And just one last final point. I mean, it's good to hear. Well, I know that ongoing conversations are with a potential incoming Labour government. Fingers crossed, with all the rest of the stuff. And I know that Labour councillors and Labour councils are having those conversations as well. I hope as part of those discussions it's emphasising the fact that the local government has lost a lot of its skill base over the last 5 to 10 years. So money isn't necessarily the whole answer to the problem, certainly in the shorter term.
I agree with that. Yeah. I mean, I think that it is a skill shortage as well. Yeah.
Yeah. But thank you for the report, and I was going to say, I'm not sure you can totally welcome a report with all that financial news, but I think, like Lucy, certainly welcome the figures to be able to scrutinise. Moving on to the panel work plan, which is all in front of us. I think a couple of things have come out of this meeting today. One about commercial and the commercial and corporate estate, and also potentially looking at investing to save when it comes to children and adult services, capital and revenue. And I think I said at the previous meetings, I'm sure that members of the panel will come up with ideas between panels. Please, to Lucy and myself and to officers and to other panel members, any ideas or for future work plan. And looking around, I always try to finish meetings within 2 hours, because I think the quality of input after 2 hours goes down substantially. So thank you all, and declare the meeting closed.